Wouldn't it have been fun to put George Washington on his ass? Well, good luck with that. That man was a stud. Welcome to Kung Fu Podcast number 212, where we're going to be grappling with the president. Welcome to Kung Fu Podcast, where we explore the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. And if this is your first time to the program, welcome. You're in the audience of some of the finest and sharpest martial artists in the world. People who put in a great deal of sweat and a great deal of care into honing their craft. Grappling is a core component of the Chinese martial arts curriculum, or at least it should be. Unfortunately, most folks just give it lip service if they just skim over the top of it. And that's also true in many of the Japanese styles. But in that case, I'm going to defer to friends of the program, Ando Merzwa and Ian Abernathy, because they explore the grappling and some of the other components of the curriculum in the Japanese styles much more thorough than I do. Grappling is one of the means to the ends, and that's your objective. What are you trying to achieve through your training, or in this case, in this set of circumstances? Joint locking is another category all unto itself. A lot of things that you might do would lead into a lock. So you might sweep into a lock, you might strike into a lock, you might grapple into a lock, but most of the time locking has to be practiced separately because they usually happen incidentally or accidentally, because it's really hard to just go out and go, okay, I'm gonna get him in a shoulder lock today. Now, usually you're going to end up in a position, and if you know enough of the locks at different joints, you'll know when you're there, and it's almost just organic. You just hit it. But that takes several repetitions. Did you know that grappling, or what was known as the Old Irish style, was the most popular sport in the 18th and 19th century? Every parish would have a champion, or county would have a champion, and they would be pitted against each other periodically. It's a fixed hand style where you have one hand up here on the collar, the right hand, and the left hand is on your opponent's elbow. And then you start to go at it. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. Plus, the value that it would have to your martial arts training. In order to come out victorious, you had to put your opponent down by 3 points. You had to put 2 shoulders in 1 hip or 2 hips in 1 shoulder. Smaller guys oftentimes have an advantage in this particular style of wrestling. And even back in the old days, there were very large purses for the champion. Wrestling has existed in North America since the colonial period, all the way back to the 15th century. And George Washington is one of the best wrestlers on record. When George Washington was 15 years old, he was entering Reverend Murray's school in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was confronted by some bullies. Now, he had already been training a little bit in some wrestling, and he wasn't going to take this pushing around sitting down. One of the things I did not mention earlier is that in the old days, the collar and elbow style also included pins, submissions, kicks, throws, and chokes. It was a brutal wrestling style. Washington was very well known for his brute strength and his wrestling abilities. In fact, even 10 years before he became the president, he was extremely powerful and noted. He took on 7 challengers from the Massachusetts Volunteers and beat 7 of them consecutively. His championship was never relinquished. He eventually, I guess, just became president, and they just passed it on to someone else. We do not know if there was a belt or any sort of physical representation of this championship. Nothing like that was recorded. However, we do know that it was the earliest version of any championship of record in North America. It was written several times that George Washington cemented his fighting spirit through wrestling, the sort of tenacity and perseverance that he was going to need to get through the Revolutionary War. Another very powerful collar and elbow style wrestler was President Taft. He was 6 foot, 247 pounds when he graduated from Yale as a wrestling champion. His favorite move was a snapmare. The snapmares are identified as any time that you put your opponent's feet over his head as you throw him. Now, let me tell you, that is extremely devastating, even on a good-fashioned 2-inch mat. I cannot imagine how hard that must have felt against some of that good clay and good sand back in the old days. In regards to Taft's physical stature, there was a secretary there named Elizabeth Jaffrey at the White House. She served from 1909 to 1926 for 4 different presidents. But once Taft sent a note over to the Secretary of War. In that note, President Taft let the Secretary of War know some of the things that they had done that day as he was on his horseback ride. It came back through the Secretary that the Secretary wrote back and said, "How's the horse?" Teddy Roosevelt was also a scrapper. He enjoyed a good fight whenever he could, and particularly he boxed when he was younger, till he separated a retina, and then he focused mostly on his grappling. He wasn't too shy either. When he was the police commissioner of New York City, he was known to walk around, and he would look to see if his officers were first awake and doing their jobs. He led his Rough Riders into Cuba, and as well took on monopolies. He was trying to get better hours and work conditions for employees here in the United States by getting their hours reduced and their wages improved. There came a day where Roosevelt saw a judo presentation by famed Japanese master Yamashita Yoshiki. One of the things that he would talk about is that he was so impressed of how skilled his instructors were in their art that they could throw him around, but he wasn't injured. He kept working on it until eventually he earned the very impressive rank of 3rd Brown in that particular art. It is also a well-known fact that Abraham Lincoln was a good wrestler. He would take on bullies just about any chance he got, and he was working in a small town of New Salem, Illinois. There was a local bully there named Jack Armstrong, and his boss and several of the people there were sure hoping that Abe would be glad to take on this bully. Abe Lincoln took on that bully, Jack Armstrong, and he beat him. It also became well known that Lincoln wasn't opposed to be given a speech and be up on the platform, and some ruffian or somebody who might be heckling some of his supporters, he wasn't opposed to getting off that platform, going down there and tossing them around a little bit, and then he would go back up on the platform and finish his speech. There were several other presidents who would participate in combative sports. Gerald Ford was a boxer. Dwight Eisenhower was also a boxer and a wrestler, and plus there were several others. One of the things I really wanted to emphasize in today's episode is how grappling really is part of the martial arts curriculum. And it's also one of the few sports still today that really puts one man's will against another in a platform that it takes a lot of strength, technique, power, and perseverance to overcome. I hope that if you or if one of your children have an interest in grappling, that you let them pursue it, because it really can change lives. I'd like to share with you a post that I saw. One of my friends asked, "Why do you pay so much money for your kid to wrestle?" Well, I have a confession to make. I don't invest any money for my kid to wrestle. Well, if you're not paying for your son to wrestle, then what are you paying for? Well, I'm paying for those moments when my son is so tired that he wants to quit, but he doesn't. I pay for those days when my son comes home from school and is too tired or too sore to go to practice, but he goes anyway. I pay for my son to learn to be disciplined, focused, and dedicated. I pay for my son to learn to take care of his body and his equipment. I pay for my son to work with others and to be a good teammate, be gracious in defeat and humble in success. One of the big ones is that I'm paying so that my son learns to deal with disappointment. When he doesn't get that win that he had hoped for, but he goes back week after week, giving it his best shot. I pay for my son to learn to respect other wrestlers, coaches, and the officials. I'm paying so that my son learns that there's a lot of hard work and years of practice, with a lot of getting your ass handed to you sometimes to become a champion. But you keep practicing and working, and it begins to unveil itself. I pay for my son to be proud of his small achievements and rather have him on a mat than in front of a TV screen. I could continue, but in short, I don't pay for wrestling. I'm paying for the opportunity for my son to get out there on a mat and to learn to develop the qualities and the character that he's going to need, not just for himself, but to occasionally help someone else. That's the sort of power, the sort of strength that I'm paying for and investing in when I get my child out there to wrestle. This is T.W. Smith. I hope you have a fantastic practice today, and I look forward to talking with you again real soon. Grappling is a core component of the Chinese martial arts curriculum. Did you know that wrestling has existed in the colonial... He wasn't too shy either. When he was the police commissioner there,